so much for that overview of Change Labs and sharing more about the resources that you all offer. As Raquel mentioned, I've been very fortunate this year to have been able to work with the Change Labs team as one of their contract workers and helping to provide support here at the Change Labs eShip Hub, as well as moving into like a business coaching role with our business incubator program we just wrapped up recently. So lots of love to Raquel and to the team, to Holly and Sophia. I've been working with them closely all throughout this year, and it's definitely been a major highlight and gift of mine for 2024 for sure. So thank you, Raquel, for inviting me to the space today to be here to share and present on this big topic. I was just teasing one of the visitors here that's here at the Change Labs eShip Hub right now. I was like, yeah, what a great topic, like a big topic, right? To like end the year with. And at the same time, like, what a wonderful opportunity for us to sit and reflect and be in community together. I am so like overwhelmed by all of you who decided to take your time out of your day today to attend today's workshop. I see a lot of friends and family on this call and a lot of new visitors here today. I'm excited to get to know you all and to just be in community with everybody. I have people here on the call from different parts of my life, different walks and paths of my life, and it just means a lot that you all are here today and wanted to show up for yourself too, to dive into this topic and to learn something maybe new, or maybe even to contribute to whatever healing journey you may be on or beginning too. So welcome, everybody is welcome in the way that you are showing up today. So a little bit about me, I'm going to introduce myself in Diné. Yat A, Sha'e Ashihin, Ishlit, Tachini, Bashishtin, Tabahedashache, Kinflachini Dashanala, Sha'e Apryl Yanishya. My name is Apryl, and I'm Diné. And calling in from my birthplace, actually, Totnan is Dizzy here in Tuba City, Arizona, Western Navajo Nation. We always joke around here saying the West Side's the best side, but all of Navajo Nation is beautiful and wonderful. But yeah, I'm calling in from my birthplace, and I was born here, actually down the street in a trailer that is still up and being lived in. And if you look at my birth certificate, it literally has the trailer space number. And I love telling that story because I think there's something so special and sacred in thinking about being born from home and was brought into this world by an incredible, strong, amazing Diné woman who's on this call too. Yahet Shema for being here today. And so, yeah, I was born here, but I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Albuquerque / Rio Rancho, New Mexico. I lived in a lot of different areas around the US. And just about 2.5 years ago, I moved here to Tuba City. And it's been a very full, like, circle kind of journey and moment to be able to return back to my birthplace. Something really special about that. And to have been able to be connected to Change Labs here in Tuba City has been wonderful. So I know some of you shared already, like where you're calling in from. If you haven't had a chance yet, I'd love to hear like where people are calling in from, where you're zooming in from today, and even a little bit more about like what brought you to the session. Why did you want to attend today? Maybe it was by my personal invite, but maybe also there's other reasons. You know, why are you wanting to show up for yourself and engage in this topic today? You know, first of all, I want to recognize I was very fortunate back in 2023 to connect with this program called Trauma of Money. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I was fortunate enough to connect and learn about this program called Trauma of Money. It was a program that was founded by Chantel Chapman. And I learned about it through some of my Indigenous colleagues and friends, and just really happy that I was able to connect with this topic. It came at a time when I was digging more into my own healing. I had finally connected and reached out to a therapist. I've been working through different kind of just areas of my life and reflecting on how like it has influenced or impacted like my adulthood and my current life. And so, and part of that journey, some of my Indigenous friends and colleagues and mentors of mine connected me to the Trauma of Money program. And I had a chance to go through the professional track and get certified in this. And it's just really in the last month that I started to share this out in community. I had an opportunity to co-facilitate this training with Chantel, the founder of Trauma of Money, last month with our business incubator program with Change Labs. And then Raquel and Sophia reached out and asked if I would love to bring it out to the public and to close out our workshop series for this year. I was really excited about it and honored to have been asked. In today's session, we are going to dive into like emotional side, mental health side of things. And so I just really want to, honor and like put the energy out there to say, like, take care of yourself as we go through these topics. Some of these topics might be new for some of you, and some of it might be also kind of activating to your brains or nervous system. So make sure, to nourish yourself in the ways that you need to today. I have my tea here today and my water and things like that. So you'll see me taking care of myself as well. Like I mentioned, I've been on this healing journey, kind of more intentional healing journey, I would say, in the last like maybe 6-7 years. But I'm also a work in progress. So some of the things I'm sharing today, like I've been honored to learn and to be able to bring it out to community and share with others. But I'm not perfect at it, and nobody is, right? So I'm a work in progress as well. I'm still healing. I'm still engaging and integrating these practices too. Some days I do better with them than others, and that's okay. And so just wanting to be in connection and community with you all, and, let's heal and learn together today in this space and this time of reflection too, as we close out 2024. So today, this is just a quick overview of what I'm hoping we will cover. And I will be honest, I have way more slides than we have time for today. So I will make sure to cover what I feel like we're being called to cover and talk about today. But hopefully these are some of the topics we're going to be able to cover and just kind of give an introduction to some of these areas. And also, I'm hoping to leave some time for discussion and question and answers too at the end. I did integrate some reflection prompts and opportunities for you all to share, whether you would like in the chat or even coming off mute. And sharing with the community here. Before we get started, I do want to talk about consent, and that all of us are at choice, including myself as the presenter, about what I feel called to share. Maybe right now there may be certain components I don't share today. Same with you all as you engage in some of the journal prompts and exercises today, that you are at choice and you are at consent to be able to decide what you want to engage in and what you do not. This session is being recorded by Change Labs, and so that might be something that you might consider in regards to what you want to share and not share at this time. And so just want to make sure to center that in our time together today. And I love this poem, Abigail Echo Hawk. She's Pawnee, and she actually just posted this yesterday on her social media page. And I reached out to her and was like, wow, this is so timely in connection to today, to this session today. And I had asked for her permission to share it. But I love what she wrote here in regards to story and how sacred story can be, especially within Indigenous communities, and how story is about teaching and sharing. And sometimes certain parts of our story are not yet ready to be birthed yet, and that's okay. As I mentioned earlier, advocating for our needs. I want to make sure that we're all, feeling good and taken care of in this space today. And so just prioritize your safety and your care for yourself, for your body, for your nervous system. We're going to talk a lot today about how trauma impacts the brain and body. And so there may be some new kind of feelings that you're engaging with that you haven't, noticed before. So just take a moment right now to assess what your needs are. Maybe you need to turn the camera off. Maybe you need to grab that cozy blanket or sweater to kind of make you feel comforted. Maybe you need to grab some water, tea, or whatever. Feel free to just check in with what your needs are throughout today's session. And like I mentioned before, in this today's workshop, I have way more slides than we're going to cover today. And I'm just leaning into the universe to be able to help us, guide us through the session, and to talk about what needs to be shared and talked about today. And know that there's going to be things that we cover that aren't going to have any closure to them. And just the fact that you're here today and like raising awareness around this topic and for yourself and your own healing journey is like a big step. So just honor that, and also know, just a heads up, that we may not have closure on certain things today. So I'm going to share a little bit about my story. There's a collage of all kinds of different photos here. As I mentioned, I am Diné, and I was born here in Tuba City. I grew up in Albuquerque/Rio Rancho, New Mexico. And I want to, before I dive in, part of the sharing of story, I want to normalize like being more open and honest about just the realities of some of the ways that we grew up in our childhood, and how experiences in our childhood may have impacted us and continue to impact us in adulthood. And I also want to be careful about like what I share and how I share it too, because even though I'm going to share my own personal story, it's also very interconnected to my family and to like my loved ones. And so I just want to be mindful of that too. And also, like, I feel very grounded in purpose. Like, I'm very passionate about healing, like my own healing journey I've been on, but I'm also very passionate about supporting others, especially within Indigenous communities and Native nations, to heal. And so just leading into that purpose part of what I shared today about my story. And yeah, just a content warning, like, some of the things I'm going to talk about are different types of trauma. And so just, be mindful and take care of yourself and take a break if you need to. But I want to share this because it also helps bring perspective about like what brings me to this space and like why like I'm wanting to do more of this within community. So I'm a survivor of complex trauma, of different types of complex traumas. I grew up, like I said, off the reservation. Even though I was close to home, like to my homelands and to my people, I did feel very disconnected in the way that I grew up. I grew up with a single mother, and I'm the eldest daughter. I'm the eldest sister in the family, which I take a lot of pride in that role, and that responsibility. And at the same time, too, there's a lot of hurt and pain and challenges that I went through being in that type of role. So one of the types of trauma that wouldn't be surprised if some of you have experienced as well is called parentification. So parentification is like when a child is in a position where they are like having to parent either their own parents, or they're having to parent, and be a parent to their siblings. And part of parentification is that when you're in childhood, if you studied psychology or biology, you'll learn about just like childhood development, and like how at certain ages you are more prepared to support and like handle certain emotions, and at other ages, especially when you're really young, you're not really like set up in that way to do that well. And so parentification, the reason it's a form of trauma is that I had to experience some things at a very early age that like my brain and body and nervous system weren't quite ready for. And so that has been like a piece and a layer to like my healing journey as I've been unraveling these pieces, is the impact that parentification has had. It's not uncommon for like the eldest like child or the eldest daughter to have experienced parentification. It's actually, fairly common. And sometimes parentification impacts even other children in the line, not just the eldest, but it is fairly common for that to happen for eldest children. Growing up in a single parent household, means that we, did have limited resources sometimes, and I saw growing up, like our family living paycheck to paycheck. And so I grew up in a sense of scarcity, and we're going to talk a lot about scarcity today. But scarcity is a form of trauma as well, and like how that impacts the way you think about money and the way that you engage with money, or the way you avoid money too. And so that process of like living paycheck to by paycheck, seeing that growing up in my adulthood, fast forward to when I started to be on my own, I noticed myself starting that cycle, even though I had more access to resources and money. And so these are some photos here just to show like how like my kind of journey has been in reconnection to self and reconnection to healing, and really thinking about the impact that financial trauma has had on my life, as well as thinking about like really wanting to point out too that, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more about the impact that societal oppression and colonization and capitalism has had, especially on Indigenous communities. And, even within my own family, like the impact that boarding school has had in our disconnection to our Diné identity, that's also a form of trauma. And so a lot of the experiences that I grew up in and I saw the adults around me living and doing, that's also connected to those things. So I want to make sure to point out like it's not any one person's fault for the type of environments we grow up in. And at the same time, there's a need for healing around that. And so back to in connection to money. So as I mentioned before, like, because I went to college, I went to Occidental College in Los Angeles, got my degrees in sociology and a minor in psychology, went to a really like private, white, wealthy school, and went into that experience not really understanding my relationship with money. And I pulled out called like student loans. I got a credit card, which ended up having to pay so much more money on because I just didn't know how to work with money, and I didn't understand it. And I also noticed that I was very much like spending money on things that like I don't need, or spending money on like material things to like fit in, to kind of have a certain image, and the social acceptance kind of piece of that. And I was also spending money that was in connection to people pleasing. I'm like still recovering from people pleasing, and sometimes I can like overgive or overdo, and so that's part of like my needing to feel accepted and belonging. And so those are things that I've been having to work through. And just that like my healing journey started with learning about these topics. So, and understanding these topics more and understanding why my family experienced the things that they've experienced. And the other thing I want to mention though too is like part of my healing journey has been reconnection to Diné identity. So I have like photos here where, especially now that I moved back home, where I've had an opportunity to like learn how to do Navajo weaving. I've been doing this with my mom, her, and I've been traveling hours and hours to different areas for classes, been learning more about the land and growing, trying to grow food, which I'm not great at, but trying, and, just like that reconnection to that. And the other part of like I think about is that this is also like a form of Indigenous wealth, right? Like reconnection to Indigenous identity, reconnection to the land, to all living things. And the other piece of that too is this like amazing relationship I have with my life partner. James has a picture here. I have a picture here with him. We've been building this life together that's focused on a lot on healing and support and love, and something that, I didn't experience as much growing up, but I have now. And I hold that very sacredly. And just like the opportunities that we have, that even if we've gone through some hard things and painful things and traumatic things, there is still opportunity, regardless of how old you are or where you're at in your life, to heal and to move forward and to reconnect and to really get regrounded with yourself. And that's been, purpose for the last few years of my life. So with that said, I want to just take a moment to just take a breath. So there's some somatic practices that are built into today's session. So sometimes when we may be activated, like our brains and our nervous systems are activated, there's a methodology called somatics, and it's the practice of the body and its relationship to the mind. And so it's about getting reconnected to our body, our mind-body connection. Somatic practices, there's so many different kinds out there. Some of them are breath work, some of them are movement and dance and things like that. And so I thought we would just take a moment to pause and get connected with each other. And if you wouldn't mind, if it's accessible to you, I would love it if you could come off camera. And part of like connection is like social connection with each other. So if you're not able to come off camera, that is totally fine. But I welcome you all to just kind of smile, maybe a wave, even though we're in this virtual space today. Just want to take time to connect If you're not able to come off camera, feel free to react, send a reaction, heart emoji, whatever that you're feeling today. Love to see all of you here in community and just to connect across the internet waves. Thank you. I thought one of the things we could do too is not just the social connection, but I would love for us to also do a little bit of grounding and breath work. And so if you want to turn your cameras off now, you're fine to do that. But just wherever you are, if you're seated or standing, get comfortable in your space. I'm going to play a song here. I just want you to take notice to your body and your breath. And we're just going to notice, like with no judgment. You may notice there may be certain areas of your body that are feeling a little activated, or maybe parts of your body that are a little tense. Maybe you're feeling a lot of pressure and overwhelmed with the holiday season. And as this song is playing, like, invite you all, if it's accessible to you, to just inhale through your nose and exhale out through your mouth. And as you're inhaling all the good and richness and wonderful beauty and stuff that's around you, and exhaling out anything that is no longer serving you. So I'm going to play probably just like 30 seconds of this song, and we can just kind of breathe together today. Can you all hear that? No. Let me try the share again. I always forget you have to click the share audio. Back to the space. You can wiggle your toes, kind of move a little bit of motion in your body. Just come back and orient yourself in your space. One of the other somatic practices that can be really helpful too is, like, when you're feeling really overwhelmed or have a lot of anxiety, is just getting yourself present in your space. So as you're coming back, just orienting yourself and maybe looking around the room and naming 5 colors that you see, or 5 shapes, or whatever is accessible to you, just calling them out. Like, I see yellow, turquoise, black, white, green. Just kind of bringing yourself back to space. And Chantel loves to share this in the Trauma Money program too, where she'll be like, look behind you, make sure there's no like saber-toothed tigers behind you, any perceived danger, look where your exits are, because sometimes, like, we feel more grounded and steady when we know that we're in a safe space. So thank you for practicing that with me today. So let's dive in more into this topic. Let's see. All right. So trauma of money. So one of the main taglines of the program of Trauma of Money is to decrease shame and to increase discernment. So what does that mean? Shame is typically like defined as like a feeling of embarrassment or humiliation, like a perception of having done something that's like immoral or improper or dishonorable. And so when we feel shame or we feel ashamed about something, it can really like lead us to certain types of unhealthy behaviors, or behaviors that are not like efficient or good for us, especially when it comes to like our relationship with money. And some of us have experienced, like chronic shame, where it becomes really internalized. And when shame becomes really internalized, it can end up having you develop like a negative self-critic. Like, I'm a bad person, I'm worthless, I have no value. You may feel really guilty, thinking like, I'm unworthy. Maybe you're like, I have a ton of debt. Like, that must mean that I'm so bad with money, and really just putting yourself down. So part of the approach with trauma of money is that we want to decrease that. We want to decrease shame. We want to decrease that feeling and those thoughts. And we want to turn up discernment. Discernment is basically like being in a place of being able to make like good judgments, being able to perceive and understand and judge things like really clearly and to make like good choices. And so that is something that, as we lead into today's session, that we'll come back to in different ways. So financial trauma, these are different types of financial trauma. Some of it is in regards to like chronic financial distress. So if you grew up in poverty and having limited resources, growing up in that place of scarcity, and having, worry about money and finances often, that is a form of trauma. Other components of financial trauma are even like domestic financial abuse. Maybe you're in a relationship with somebody that's very controlling with money, and the experiences that you have in that situation can be very traumatic. And the one we're going to talk a lot about today is scarcity, just like how growing up in scarcity can really impact your relationship and behaviors with money. So this is the trauma of money method. I'll just highlight these quickly here, but we'll want to really like center these different components of trauma. And so one of them is generational trauma. Like, did your ancestors experience trauma, especially in our Indigenous communities because of colonization and forced assimilation? We know that our ancestors experienced trauma, right? And even though Indigenous people have known this since time immemorial, science is just catching up now in studying like epigenetics and how trauma is actually passed down in our DNA. And I want to recognize that generational like wisdom and strength and resilience is also very much in our blood and in ourselves today too. Relational trauma would be like core relationships you had in your childhood, whether it's with a parent or caretaker or other individuals in your life, siblings, cousins, uncles, aunts, and how those types of relationships may impact your relationship with money. Societal trauma is a huge one. The dominant society we live in is very oppressive to Black, Indigenous, people of color folks. And that is really like pervasive in our culture, and it impacts like the way that we engage in society and the way we work through the world. And so really thinking about like colonization and like internalized capitalism and like how we may have adopted a lot of these different things, thinking that like my worth is tied to money, and how like we may need to work on unraveling that and healing from that. And so the societal trauma piece is definitely a big component. I wanted to just share like briefly, if you haven't yet like studied like the federal Indian policy, like the history of federal Indian policy, it is so pervasive and so it's impacted our people, and it continues to impact our people today. And so I wanted to make sure that I touched upon this, even though we're not going to have time to get into all these components. But I did want to highlight the fact that like the United States did target our people. And if you look back at federal Indian policy and law and that history and this timeline here, you'll really learn and understand like how they were really trying to wipe us out and disconnect us from our Indigenous identity. And so this is all trauma. This is definitely has impacted us in many ways. And if you haven't yet like learned about this, or you want to learn more about it, I have yet to read this book, but a lot of people have mentioned this is a great book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States. But there's a lot of good readings written by Indigenous people that really dive into the impact that policy has had. So again, this is all a form of societal trauma. Systemic trauma, understanding that the systems that we currently live in, like marginalize some people and like uplift others. So, I mentioned capitalism earlier. I'm not saying like, oh, you shouldn't make money or you shouldn't engage with the system, because that's the system we're living in right now, right? But we also want to be mindful of like how those systems like impact the way that we move in the world, and like also find ways to maybe do things differently or do things in a way that align with our values when it comes to engaging in like the current system of capitalism or other social contexts. Also, laws of nature. Like as Indigenous people, this is like so connected to like our ancestors and our values and our teachings around that there's so many other worldviews around money and wealth. And I'll touch upon a little bit more about Indigenous wealth, but there's so much more different perspectives around money and wealth and that we could dive into to think about healing our money trauma. And then financial literacy. I love the way that Trauma of Money talks about these different components, because financial literacy, you see it all the time, right? There's like all these different resources now coming out to support people with financial literacy, saying, well, if this person just knew about credit and the importance of credit scores, or if they just knew like how to set up a savings account or how to do all these things, like things would be better for them. But it's often where if people are coming from a place of trauma that you can't even engage with learning financial literacy, it can be really challenging for you. And this is something I've personally have experienced myself. It's where I like, even though I've gone to higher education, I have these different degrees. When I engage in financial literacy work, I get all like, ooh, like my nervous system gets kind of kooky and I get a little like overwhelmed. And it's hard for me to actually engage with the content that's being learned. And so financial literacy is important. And at the same time, like the trauma piece is something that we have to heal and work on in order to really engage with that type of learning. The other component I wanted to talk about is reciprocity. This is back in connection to like the laws of nature and just how like we actually have an inherent like neuro expectancy of reciprocity. So when reciprocity is not present, our nervous system can actually feel like a lack of safety and kind of send some alerts through our body. And reciprocity is such a very connected like Indigenous value, right? And so, just the importance of that reciprocation and like sharing and receiving and giving and all of those things are so important and tied to like our Indigenous ways and identity. And it's also been studied that like we actually have an expectancy of reciprocity. And when reciprocity doesn't happen, how that can make us feel activated and disconnected to self. So I would love to hear from you all about answering this question. And again, consent. So you get to decide if you want to share. But if you do feel called to share, I would love to hear from some of you all about like, what is my core belief about myself and money that is unhelpful? So some examples might be like, I can't be trusted with money, or I don't deserve money, or I'm afraid that I might end up in poverty again. Those are some examples. What is your core belief about yourself and money that is unhelpful? And if anybody feels called to share, you can either drop it in the chat or you can come off mute. I'd love to bring some voices into this space. If there are anybody feeling called to share, you can either raise your hand or come off mute and share.
I can share. Hi everyone, my name's Delphina. So one of my core beliefs is if I'm in a position now where I'm comfortable and I feel like if I don't help my family out financially, then I'm selfish.
Yeah, Delphina, for sharing that. I think that's a very common experience and a very common thing to feel and to have some anxiety or other feelings around too. I see others in the chat too, having a lot of money is innately evil. If I see a family member struggling, I feel selfish, which is what Delphina just connected to as well. Saying lots of guilt about being better off than my close relatives. Yeah, for real. I think a number of us agree with each other and feel similarly, right? I don't have a sense of what is enough money. Yeah. And I invite you all to, like, even after this session, to like come back to this question too, and just kind of reflect and journal on your own as well. And just think about just your relationship with money and what kind of beliefs you're holding that may be causing some stress and some anxiety, some overwhelm. The more that we start to just like put it out there and just see it and look at it outside of ourselves, that's also like a lot of healing can happen around that. Just noticing it, just being aware of it. Yeah, I have a sense of duty to provide for my family as the eldest child. I have to remind myself that I'll be okay if I'm asked to share money, but also it's okay to not share money. Yeah, I feel all of you. I feel all of this. Yeah, continue to share if you'd like. But like I said, come back to this question as well when you feel like you want that, you have that need to just kind of like spend some time with what's coming up for you. So I'm going to dive into talking about the impact of trauma on the brain and body. I first also want to just acknowledge and say yeah for those of you who shared and for being brave to just like be honest about what you're experiencing. I think the more that we do that, the more that we collectively heal too. So yeah, thank you for sharing. The impact of trauma on the brain and body. So this was so like impactful for me when I learned about this and was like, oh my gosh, like this explains so much about what I've been experiencing, what has been happening. And so what is trauma? So trauma, Peter Levine is one of the scholars in like the trauma and healing space. He defines it as anything that we deem as threatening to our life or sense of self. And so this also is, like I mentioned before, societal oppression, you know, the impact that colonization, capitalism, or enslavement has had, like even on our African American brothers, sisters, and relatives, intergenerational trauma that lives in our bodies. And also, trauma can also be a single incident or experience. So maybe you're someone like me who's I've actually been in a few car accidents. And now when I'm driving in a vehicle, if my husband slams on the brake, I like have a huge reaction. And I feel bad for him because I always freak out, but it's because that trauma is still in my body. And it comes out when those experiences take place. Other types of single incidents or experiences of trauma might be like a natural disaster if you experience something that was really devastating. Trauma can also be like ongoing trauma exposure. So those of us who are, you know, living in Black and brown bodies, like we live in this oppressive, like racial oppressive society as a person of color, we're like being exposed to trauma like on a daily basis, and how that can really have an impact on our brains and bodies. And so I want to share that in a trauma state, every response is an action in survival instead of a cognitive choice. So what that means is when our brains and our nervous systems are activated, our response, our brain's like only job is to make sure we survive. Like that is its main mission for making sure you survive in every part of your life, right? So when we're in a trauma state, our brains basically shut off, and our response is just to survive. And we don't actually have the ability to connect to the parts of our brain that allows us to actually take a pause and a breath and to like have an actual choice in terms of what decisions we're going to make when we are in a trauma state. So these are different types of trauma responses. And these are typical responses that we have when we're in a trauma state. And so we had a wonderful teacher who is a licensed social worker during my trauma money training. Her name is Andrea Gutierrez Click, and she's a licensed social worker. And she came in and gave this amazing presentation about how trauma impacts the brain and bodies. And so a lot of what I'm sharing here today is from her and her teachings. So one of the trauma responses is called fight. So when we are in a trauma state, when our nervous systems and our brains are activated, we can get into fight mode. Like it may come out as like some of the emotions that may come out as like angry, you might be judgmental, you might like have some distrust, or it might also be like, it can also show up as like being really controlling, the need to control. And also it can be very self-destructive, like depending on what you're experiencing in that time. Fight mode is like the body's way of confronting a threat with assertiveness, aggression, or a proactive attitude. So if like I'm in high alert, I'm like really like freaking out, and I'm just like defensive and I'm just wanting to fight. And this is actually a one of the trauma responses that I go to in certain situations, and I've had to try to be more mindful of. Flight is basically you're like, peace out. Like, this is too much for me. Like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety. My nervous system is activated. I'm going to distance myself from the situation. I'm gonna just like walk away and just disconnect. This can also like be like, this is where it's like the body's urge to run away from danger because it's wanting to seek safety. And when I talk about safety, I'm not just talking about like physical safety, but I'm also talking about like emotional safety, spiritual safety, mental safety. And so if you are very activated and you're not feeling safe, you might go into flight mode and just like dodge, get out of town kind of thing. The other response is freeze. Sometimes this shows up as a lot of like fear and anxiety. So freeze mode can also be like you're just like frozen. Like your body has like an inability to move or act against the threat. You just feel like immobile and paralyzed. And sometimes I go here too, like when I'm experiencing overwhelm, where I just can't make a decision. I'm just like, I just shut down, And so sometimes this can be an experience too. Fawning is very much connected to people pleasing. I have a lot of challenges with people pleasing. I just want everybody to be happy and loved in my life. But sometimes that people pleasing is very much a trauma response because it's your body's attempt to like want to please someone to avoid like conflict or to avoid them being angry or sad or upset, like those types of things. So even though like it may sound great and wonderful that you want people to be loved and cared for, it can also be like overwhelming when you're like, it's a trauma response that you're experiencing over and over again. So let's talk about the brain. Some people talk about the brain with using their hands. So if it's accessible to you, I thought it'd be helpful to do that. You're welcome to put your hand up to the camera if you're on camera, or if you're off, totally fine. But I want to explain like these parts of the brain. So if you think about it, your palm represents the brainstem, and the brainstem controls your basic body functions like your heartbeat, your sleep, your alertness. Your thumb here is the limbic system. The limbic system connects to or includes the amygdala and the hippocampus. This part of your brain is connected to emotions, to learning, and to memory. Your fingers here represent the cortex. This part here is responsible for thinking and planning. And so if you wrap your fingers around your limbic system, around the amygdala and hippocampus, the fingers on the outside, right? They represent the cortex, like I said, which is responsible for thinking and planning, right? So when you're like, we're always thinking, right? And if you're like me, I'm always planning something. And so this part is always very active, right? Something's always happening. Your wrist represents the spinal cord and vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve, I won't be able to cover it today, but there's a theory called the polyvagal theory. And they talk a lot about the vagus nerve and healing trauma in the brain and body. I'd invite you all to research that and Google it and learn more about it. But that's what your wrist is, the spinal cord and the vagus nerve. So if you look at the slide here, our prefrontal cortex, right, this area, your fingers, is your rational thinking for the purpose of regulating emotions. So when you're in a trauma state, when you're being activated, it can weaken the signals from this area, resulting in your emotions like fear running the show. So if you're in an activated state, this part is just like going wild. All right. It's not covering this area. This part's kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm out of my comfort zone. I'm in a trauma state. A lot is happening. The amygdala here, the brain's alarm system, when trauma is present, the amygdala can remain active, resulting in anxiety and chronic stress. And the hippocampus, that assists with learning and memory and is responsible for differentiating between the past and present, is also activated. So when the trauma is present, this area shrinks. Isn't that interesting? So this is what's happening to us in our bodies when we're in a trauma state. And sometimes we're not actually experiencing the trauma in that time. It could be trauma connected from the past, but you may be in a situation that activates that trauma from the past that feels like it's happening in the present. All of this stuff is happening in our brain, okay? And so what does that mean? That means that we have no access to the part of emotions and learning and memory because we are very activated. This part is like setting out alarms, right? And what that does then is it limits our cognitive function to be able to like address something maybe in a calm manner, or be able to tap into different parts of ourselves to make like good choices, healthy choices for us. And so this is really telling about like what is happening in our body. And for some of us who like go to fight, freeze, flight, fawn mode when we're in activated state, this is what's happening in the brain. And so then you may show up being very defensive or very angry or whatever, right? I have experienced that, and I've had to like bring more awareness around what happens when I'm feeling activated. And even with my partner, like I've had to, I'm still learning and growing. Like I said, I'm a work in progress, but like I've had to tell him, like, I'm feeling very activated right now. Can we not talk about this at the moment? Or can you let me do some grounding and some breath work to like come back to this topic? Because I don't want to be mean or defensive or aggressive, because he don't deserve that. And neither do I. I deserve good things too. So like just, you know, being more aware of those things that happen and taking a pause to come back to it in a good way. So we talked about scarcity earlier. So scarcity is a type of financial trauma. And when we live in scarcity, or we're living in the belief of scarcity, like I said, it reduces our cognitive capacity. So we have limited capacity to process information. It reduces our executive decision making. So we may have trouble making decisions. We may have trouble organizing. We might have some impulse control too, which I'll talk about later, in being tempted to buy certain things, even though like you have limited resources, right? There's been a lot more study around like financial scarcity, and this behavioral economic, I can't even say this word, economists and psychologists. These two, there's actually a book written called Scarcity: Why Having Too Little Means So Much. And knowing that when we are living in financial scarcity, or living with the belief that we have financial scarcity, it actually reduces a person's cognitive capacity more than going one full night without sleep. I don't know about you all, but I need sleep. And so like when I don't have a full night's sleep, so yeah, I get through the day, but it's challenging, right? And so just thinking about like how much financial scarcity limits our capacity and our ability to do a lot of things in the world. Also, when we think about like the study of economics, like I'm not an economist and I haven't like dived in deep into studying economics, but if you look up this definition by the American Economic Association, this is how they define economics: that economics is the study of scarcity, the study of how people use resources and respond to incentives. So if our economic system is like built on scarcity, like no wonder so many of us are living in that scarcity mindset, and so many of us are interacting and behaving with our communities, our families, and if coming from a very like scarcity mindset. If economics is built on scarcity, like if you think about it, you know, when you think about like an economics, like supply and demand, you know, those types of things, or also around competition. You know, competition tends to be a big piece of like economics and a big piece of capitalism, that you're in competition with another business. If you're a business, you know, one of the things that we work with entrepreneurs is like, yeah, identify your competition. And sometimes people are like, I don't want to think about competition that way, especially in Indigenous communities, because we think of more of collaboration and connection and stuff. So I understand why competition might be a little activating for some people. But also like, if you're thinking about like, I got to compete with this next person to earn more, make more, get more visibility, get more access to resources, like that's a lot of pressure and stress and trauma, you know, that you're experiencing when we're thinking about coming from a place of scarcity. These are some other things that happen, kind of behaviors that can happen, and maybe some of you might resonate with these. I do for sure. So also like when we're in a trauma activated state, like we tend to have tunnel vision. Like we have a very narrow view of like what's possible. So whenever we feel scarce, like we maybe just hyper focus on the thing that we're scarce. And maybe it's like, you know, I'm trying to make rent and I don't know how I'm going to pay rent next month. So I'm just focused on that. That's it. I don't have capacity to focus on any other components of my life. And so you're just very like tunnel vision about what it is that you're focusing on. The other piece of being in a trauma activated state is that you can become like extremely focused on certain things, which is known as the focus dividend. And I have challenge. I always have challenges with this. So I am a procrastinator. Like I don't, it just, I know it's a trauma response. It's connected to like things. And I tend to do really well. Well, I used to not do it. I don't do very well anymore. I've been trying to change and heal this behavior. But the focus dividend is basically where like you have a scarcity of time and maybe you have to get something done and it's due the next day. And so you just hunker down and you get it done. And I always tell people this, like when I was in like K through 12 like schooling, I remember one time I actually did an assignment way ahead of schedule and I got the lowest grade I ever received. But when I do it last minute and I stay up all night and get it done, I got an A. And so that wasn't helpful for like changing this behavior. And even in graduate school, oh my goodness, I probably lost several years of my life from all of the overnight studying and the work and writing I was doing, like staying up all night long, all the work I had to do to turn things in, because like my brain and my body for some reason just gets hyper focused in a time of like a time crunch. And that's scarcity. That's not financial scarcity, but that's time scarcity, right? And so that's what focus dividend is. Goal inhibitions are you lose the ability to set long-term goals. And so when you're in the tunnel vision and you're just hyper focused on one thing, you don't have the ability and capacity to think about long-term goals. So maybe, you've been like, why can't I save? Like I can't save money. I have this goal for retirement. I want to have X amount of money in my savings and I just can't get there. I can't pay off my debt. Like it's just too hard. And so it's difficult to make long-term goals. And some of the ways that you can work through that is you can actually create like mini goals within the tunnel. So even though you may still be in the tunnel, you can actually create tinier goals and seek out certain resources if they're available to you to start getting to a place where you can do more long-term goal planning. But it's important to know that it's the baby steps that have to be taken before you can even have the capacity to think about the bigger things. So some other things that happen too is like slack. So packing problems. So the metaphor that's used for this one is around like when you're packing for a trip. If you have a huge suitcase, you can pack all the things, right? I'll take like 2 extra pairs of shoes. Like I'll take this, I'll take that. I don't know if I'm going to need this, but I'm going to throw it in there just in case, right? Now, if you're packing for a trip and you have just like a tiny like carry-on suitcase, or maybe it's just a duffel bag, there's a lot of like thinking around like, what can I take? Like I need to remove the slack, right? And there's also a lot of trade-off thinking, like, should I take this or should I take that, right? And so there's like some of these things happen when we're living in a place of scarcity. The other pieces are bandwidth tax. So bandwidth tax is like having the capacity to do the things we want to do. And when we're spending so much time living in scarcity and being worried about like, how am I going to pay that next bill? How am I going to make sure I have a roof over my head and my family's head? That takes up so much space. Even if it's like in the back of your mind, it's taking up cognitive function and it's limiting your bandwidth. It's limiting your capacity to do certain things. Temptation tax is something that happens when like you're just really exhausted from bandwidth tax and you don't have capacity, that you're more likely to act out on temptation. And so when you're out shopping, even though you may have limited funds, or maybe you're on a budget and you're trying to be better about your spending, but you're out there in the world, you're shopping around, maybe you're at the local holiday bazaars that have been happening here. Yeah, I love the bazaars here on the Res. And it's really hard to go sometimes and be like, just get what you're looking for, and not be tempted to buy other things that either you don't need or that is just not going to be helpful to somebody, right? And so just something to think about, that when we are exhausted, it's not uncommon for us to then be tempted to buy something, even if we have limited money. So even if like you have a credit card bill that's overdue or rent or whatever, you may still just buy that thing because you're just exhausted from living in scarcity. So one of the things to practice that can be helpful is fault tolerance. So giving yourself a break, giving yourself the opportunity to start working through like some of the scarcity you might be feeling, and to like start putting like being intentional about different things. So sometimes when we live in a place of scarcity, we might really get overwhelmed by making a decision like, should I buy this or should I buy that, right? And what if I make the wrong decision, or what if I make the decision that like has a negative impact? Well, even if that happens, you want to also try to give yourself an affirmation to say like, wow, I am actually really awesome. Like I may have limited resources right now, but like because I have limited resources, I actually have to make really good quality decisions, and like that means a lot, right? Or like I actually am really good with money because I have to make these choices, right? And I have to work through these things. And so really just being gentle with yourself and like acknowledging areas of growth and then areas of opportunity. So part of like this work of like how trauma impacts the brain and body is also around like retraining our brains. So we can do this, like anybody can do this. It takes work and you have to be very intentional about it. But we can actually create new neural pathways in our brains. And the way we do that is going to like a growth edge. So there's a difference between discomfort and harm. So in order to retrain our brains and to create new neural pathways, we have to go to like outside of our comfort zone. We have to go to a place of discomfort. But that is not to be mistaken as for harm. Those are two very different things. Like you don't want to do things that are going to be harmful to you or to others, but you do want to get yourself out into like a new space that feels uncomfortable, and making those baby steps actually is a way to like help start retraining your mind. One of the ways that we've talked about this, like with entrepreneurs, is that sometimes around like price points and like creating like how much does this service cost, or how much do I want to charge for this product I'm making? And sometimes we are undercharging for our services and our products. And so it may be as part of like retraining your brain and getting into this place of discomfort is like, okay, let me try this new price out and let me just see what happens. However people respond to it is not like a reflection of me, let's just see, we're experimenting, right? We're trying something different out. So those are some ways that you can start, kind of going to that growth edge and like retraining your brain to think and be different in different spaces. So this connects to what I was just saying, like there's a difference between like intervention and experiments. So a lot of times in the study of psychology, especially in mental health spaces, we'll use the word intervention. Like we need to intervene and we need to change this behavior or change this like thought. But actually like that can also be very activating, and it can also like sometimes be unhelpful and limiting. And so changing our mindset to think about experimentation can really be impactful, because actually it helps us to see like, I don't need this to be perfect. I'm just going to try it out. It's like this presentation. This is the first time I'm doing this presentation solo. And yeah, I was nervous and had a lot of things going on, but I've been approaching it as I'm just going to try it out. Let's see how people respond. Let's see what lands and what doesn't. And there's opportunities for growth and learning and to change things, right? I'm just going to try it out. So that can be something that you can even try within your own life. Like maybe there's something new that you've been kind of nervous and anxious to do, but you're feeling like called to do it. Like think about it as like, I'm just going to try it out. It's just an experiment. And as Indigenous people, we have always experimented with things. We've always tried things out and learned from different processes and experiences. And so just like leaning into like shifting that mindset from like intervention to experiment can really, move a lot of things. So I'm being mindful of time. So I'm going to skip through a couple things here, but I wanted to also talk about, this is important to discuss in terms of the connection to like the impact of of trauma on the brain and body, is that we are a whole system, like a whole like being of like a major nervous system in our bodies. And when we've experienced trauma, we can go into these different states, right? And so this is, if you want to learn more about this, you could Google window of tolerance is sometimes how it's shared. In the trauma of money space, we called it window of resilience. But I also started to think about this more from a Diné perspective. And I was like, this is like the window of Hajan. Like when we think about Hajan, we think about like balance and positivity, good energy, groundedness, like being connected to self. And this is a scale here to show that our nervous systems can move between like 1 and 10 here. So like 1 to 3 is like the window of where you're experiencing freeze, collapse, avoidance, very low arousal, very low energy capacity, right? 8 to 10 is where you're really activated and you might go to that fight flight mode that I was talking about earlier. The numbers between 4 and 7, which is interesting because if you think number 4 and number 7 are actually like sacred numbers in a lot of indigenous cultures, including Diné people. But the window between 4 and 7 is like your window of Hajan. It's where you are grounded, where you are more connected to self and have the ability and access to the parts of your brain that can make good decisions, can be connected to different cognitive function. And so you could even like screenshot this, hang it up, and just kind of observe like where you move through out your day in certain situations where you experience this. These are other ways of accessing your window of Hajan. And there's like, these are all very connected to indigenous practices and ways of being. Like I think about like humming, singing, and chanting. That actually is really helpful in connection to your vagus nerve, which is right in here. And it when you have more access to that vagus nerve, it can really be helpful in getting you regulated. And I think about like being in Hajonje, being in a blessing way ceremony all night, all the singing, the beautiful sacred singing that happens in the Hogan all night. That's accessing that window of Hajan, or that window of resilience. Mindfulness and breath work, we did a little bit of that. Massage, physical activity, and diet, like what we eat, like is so important and so nourishing to our bodies. As somebody who's gone through a lot of like chronic gut health and other dietary challenges, I've really had to reconnect to like foods and like what works for me and what doesn't. And so these are just some things to think about. These are some creative resources to help with that grounding and that getting into that window of Hajan. And I'd love to hear from you all. You can share in the chat about just like what are some of the things you do to help like relieve stress, help like relieve anxiety, heal from trauma. What are some activities that you all do that just help you get in your window of Hajan? I see dance in the chat, spending time in nature, snuggling my doggy, stretches and some walks in nature. Yeah, gratitude. Yep. There's a lot of study around gratitude, around just the impact that gratitude can have. Wonderful. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. And if you're not doing anything right now, like that's totally okay too. Like just raising awareness around like, oh, I am not making time to connect and be in my window of Hajan. Let me think about this. Like, what can I do? Especially going forward in this, like for some of us, the holiday season can be very activating to our brains and nervous system, overwhelming, all these things, right? And so like, what can you do to take care of yourself and just pause and what's important and what's not? And just like, being mindful of your capacity and your energy in that way. Well, like, yeah, for sharing. Feel free to keep sharing if you want to share other ideas. We can all be inspired by each other. I'm mindful of time. We have like 5 minutes. See, I told you I way more slides than I knew I had time for today. But so I'm just going to touch on this briefly around identifying and disrupting financial shame. And I hope I plan to offer more of these types of opportunities to continue learning about this topic. So we can always do a part 2 if there's interest. So like anxiety, shame is an intense, overwhelming effect associated with the autonomic nervous system activation, inability to think clearly, and desire to hide or flee. Like anxiety, it can be contagious. So it's really interesting that the emotion of shame, is very similar to other like trauma responses and similar to like anxiety in the way that we experience it in our brains and bodies. So have you ever felt financial shame? This is something you can just personally reflect on and connect to in your own space. But these are some like ways that financial shame, trauma, or scarcity can lead us to these types of behaviors. So financial avoidance, that's for real. Like when my partner and I like engage in financial conversations and we have to like assess like our spending and like review our budget, like especially in the early stages of our relationship, I was very avoidant about it. I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. No. Like there's all kinds of things are happening inside of me. And those things still happen sometimes, to be honest. But now there's been like more awareness built around it. And like I said earlier, like I have to be like, you know what, I am in a very activated state. Let me work through what I need to work through. And then let's have the conversation about our finances. But financial avoidance is very real. Like you were just like, I don't even want to talk about it. I don't want to look at it. I don't even want to check my bank account. You know, you might also have like it may also lead to like underspending. There's people that really like, I've saw this too, especially with like elders, not so much our Indigenous elders, but like other elders who've like experienced like the Great Depression, and they lived in such a time of like really, really, really deep scarcity that they don't want to spend their money. They just like hoard it, they hide their wealth. They do like they just can't spend the money because it's just like too scary because of what they've experienced before, right? So that can also be a behavior that happens. Other pieces are like compulsive spending, staying in a financially abusive relationship. Like these are all different like ways that this type of shame and trauma can show up in the way that we work with money or don't work with money. I'm just going to go through some of these quickly here. The other part too that I want to talk about with shame is that in trauma survivors, sometimes shame can also be activated through positive events. And I feel like some of you like shared this earlier too. Like some of us maybe we didn't grow up with a lot, but now like as adults, we're like living this more like stable life and we have more access to resources. And sometimes there can be a lot of shame in that. Like, oh, I actually have a really good credit score now. Like, I don't want to tell people, or, oh, I just got promoted at work, but I don't want to share it too much because I don't want any criticism, or I don't want to make other people in my family feel bad, right? There can be some of that too. So it's not just like negative experiences or events. It could also be something really positive and something really good for you that's happening that like can be hard to actually share, or that you might feel some like shame around like doing something good in your life, right? And so just want to like put that out there, as well as like talk about lateral harm and lateral violence, especially in our Indigenous communities. We've been so impacted by trauma and grief, and that like it can then make us turn on each other and be bullies and be negative with each other. And so I just want to like put this out there to say like these are some harm that might be happening in our communities or in our families, and that like there's opportunity for each of us as we're on our own healing journeys to start bringing in more lateral kindness. Like, how do we want to show up in community? How do we want to be and interact with people? How do, and that's something like I think about too, even working here at Change Labs this past year, and the way that community members are coming in. I have a deep love for our people, even people who are not very nice sometimes and, are not easy to work with. I still have such deep love for them. And like, I want to show up with this lateral kindness, right? I want to show up with love and care and respect, and like bring that energy back into the circle, bring it back into our communities, and be supportive in everybody's healing journey in that way. So I'm going to jump into just this last slide here. I know I'm going over time, Raquel, so feel free to kick me off. But I don't want to end without us revisiting like, what is my core belief about myself and money that is helpful? Like, you all showed up for yourselves today, and you all like wanted to tap into this topic even right before the holiday. Like, I know there's always so much going on, people closing out the year at work or whatever, right? But you all showed up for yourself, and I would love to hear, you can either come off mute or in the chat just share like, what is your core belief about yourself and money that is helpful? and this could be like, I'm good with money, or I'm really good with budgeting, or I made a choice today not to fall into temptation. And I'm proud of myself for that. What is a core belief about yourself and money that is helpful? Oh, I love that. I take really good care of my resources. That's beautiful. I'm great at creating budgets in Excel. Delphine, I'm gonna have to reach out to you because that's a challenge for me. Really good at thrifting and connecting in the buy nothing community to help weed myself off of capitalism. Repurposing and crafting. Oh yeah. I love it here in Tuba City. We have a very active local Facebook group pages, and somebody just recently created a Tuba City Buy Nothing group, and I've been so stoked about it. If you don't know about the Buy Nothing groups, if you're in a city, they typically have one, and they can be very active, but they're great because it's a space for people to post things that they don't need and they just want to give away. They don't need you to buy it. They don't need you to pay them for it. Just take it. And actually, before I moved back to Tuba City, my partner and I got a free washer and dryer through a Buy Nothing group. How crazy is that? So they can be really helpful, about sharing resources in that way. I love it. So everybody lean into all the goodness and the richness and the beauty that you all have together and that you're working towards in the ways that you are engaging and working through your healing and your trauma, especially when it has in connection to money and financials. Yeah, I'm sorry that we ran out of time to connect more around I wanted to offer some discussion and Q&A. But this is my information here. And I've been seeing this quote float around social media: your presence is the best present. So as you're thinking about moving through the holiday season, if you're feeling any overwhelm or feeling people-pleasing tendencies or any of your brain or body being activated, just know that just yourself, is the best gift to the world. And wanted to share too, just some offerings as well. I plan to and hope to do more of these relationship with money workshops. There's so many more areas we could dive into that we weren't able to get to today. I'm also a certified trainer in adverse childhood experiences. It's like a 2-day training. I have not done one yet, but I am looking forward to offering that in 2025. I'm also a liberatory coach. I have some of my fellow cohort from the Coaching for Healing, Justice, and Liberation program on this call. Sending you all so much love for coming today. There's a number of liberatory coaches on this call with you all today, if you don't know. And I'm happy to work with people too, one-on-one in spaces. I love holding space for big emotions, big processing of childhood trauma. Coaching is not therapy. I want to put that disclaimer out there, but it can be therapeutic. And it can be a really great way to release a lot of things. And so I'm holding sessions now one-on-one with people virtually or over the phone. So just, work through what you want to work through, release what you want to release, and empower you to work on yourself in 2025 and show up for yourself in a good way. And there's my contact info if you have any questions or comments or want to reach out. So again, to Change Labs for giving me this opportunity to be with you all in community today. Lots of love to the team and appreciation. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and wish you best wishes as you move into 2025.